Lieutenant Marcus Thompson stepped out of the military transport vehicle, his boots hitting the sandy ground with a confident thud. The scorching Nevada sun beat down on his freshly pressed uniform as he surveyed the SEAL training facility before him. At 26, he had already earned respect in the Army Rangers, and his promotion to lieutenant had come faster than most. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed he had seen it all. The facility looked like every other military training ground he had visited. But something felt different here. The air seemed thicker, charged with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Other trainees moved around the compound with a quiet determination that caught his attention. These weren't ordinary soldiers goofing around during downtime. Every movement seemed purposeful, calculated. Marcus adjusted his gear bag on his shoulder and walked toward the main building. He had volunteered for this cross-training program, thinking it would be an easy way to add some impressive credentials to his record. After all, how different could SEAL training be from what he had already mastered? He had survived Ranger School, completed multiple deployments, and earned commendations for his leadership under fire. This was just another box to check. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus found his way to the registration desk. A gruff sergeant handed him a folder containing his schedule and room assignment. The man looked him up and down with the kind of expression that suggested he had seen plenty of cocky officers come through these doors. "You Thompson?" the sergeant asked, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "Lieutenant Thompson, yes sir," Marcus replied, emphasizing his rank. The sergeant's eyes flicked up briefly, and Marcus caught a hint of amusement in them. "Room 147. Training starts at 0500. Don't be late." Marcus grabbed his folder and headed to his quarters. The hallways were stark and utilitarian, with motivational posters featuring intense-looking commandos in various action poses. He passed several trainees who nodded respectfully when they noticed his officer insignia. This was more like it. He was used to being treated with the deference his rank commanded. His room was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a metal desk, and a locker for his gear. Marcus unpacked his belongings methodically, hanging his uniforms with military precision. He pulled out a photo of himself receiving his latest commendation and placed it on the desk where his instructors would be sure to notice it. First impressions mattered, and he wanted everyone to know they were dealing with a proven leader. That evening, Marcus joined other trainees in the mess hall for dinner. The conversations around him buzzed with nervous energy as people discussed what they had heard about the upcoming training. Some talked about legendary instructors who could break a person mentally before they even touched the physical challenges. Others whispered about trainees who had quit on the first day, unable to handle the intensity. Marcus listened with growing confidence. These people were psyching themselves out over what was essentially just advanced military training. He had led men in actual combat situations where real bullets were flying and real lives were on the line. A training exercise, no matter how tough, couldn't compare to the pressure of actual warfare. He struck up conversations with fellow trainees, casually mentioning his Ranger background and recent promotion. Most seemed impressed, asking questions about his combat experience and leadership responsibilities. Marcus enjoyed being the center of attention, sharing war stories that highlighted his quick thinking and decisive action under pressure. "I hear the instructors here are pretty hardcore," one trainee mentioned nervously. Marcus chuckled. "They're probably just regular SEALs trying to make themselves seem scarier than they are. Trust me, once they see my record, they'll know they're dealing with someone who's already proven himself in real combat." Later that night, as Marcus lay in his narrow bed, he mentally prepared for the morning. He had researched SEAL training enough to know it would involve physical challenges, mental stress, and teamwork exercises. All things he had mastered years ago. The key would be to stand out early, show the instructors that he was leadership material, and coast through the rest with minimal effort. He set his alarm for 0430, giving himself plenty of time to prepare before the 0500 start time. Being early would make a good impression, and he wanted to look sharp when he met his instructors for the first time. Marcus drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the day when he could add SEAL qualification to his already impressive resume. The alarm pierced through the darkness, and Marcus snapped awake instantly. Military conditioning had trained him to go from unconscious to fully alert in seconds. He moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency, showering, shaving, and dressing in his training gear. Everything had to be perfect. As he walked toward the training ground in the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before any new challenge. Other trainees moved silently through the shadows, their faces tense with anticipation. The facility looked different in the early morning light, more ominous somehow. But Marcus pushed those thoughts aside. He was ready for whatever they could throw at him. The training ground was a large open area surrounded by various obstacle courses, pools, and training structures. Bright lights illuminated the space, creating harsh shadows that made everything look more dramatic than it probably was. Marcus joined the formation of trainees, standing at attention as they waited for their instructors to arrive. He checked his watch. 0459. Perfect timing. He stood with his shoulders back and his chin up, presenting the image of a confident officer, ready to take charge. Around him, other trainees shifted nervously, but Marcus remained perfectly still. This was his element. At exactly 0500, figures emerged from the building and walked toward the formation. Marcus couldn't make out details in the early morning light, but he could see their silhouettes moving with the fluid grace of experienced warriors. These would be his instructors, and he was ready to show them what a real soldier looked like. The first instructor stepped into the light, and Marcus got his first clear look at the team that would be running his training. What he saw made him blink in surprise. Leading the group was a woman, probably in her early 30s, with short dark hair and the kind of lean, muscular build that spoke of serious physical conditioning. She wore standard military training gear, but something in the way she carried herself suggested this was no ordinary instructor. Marcus felt his confidence waver for just a moment. He had expected grizzled male SEALs with years of combat experience. The presence of a female instructor threw him off balance, though he quickly reminded himself that women could be just as capable as men in military roles. Still, this wasn't what he had prepared for mentally. The woman stepped in front of the formation and surveyed the group with intense brown eyes that seemed to look right through each trainee. When her gaze fell on Marcus, he felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. There was something predatory in that look, like a shark sizing up potential prey. "Good morning, trainees," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the training ground, despite not being raised. "I'm your primary instructor for this program. You can call me Instructor Walsh." Marcus straightened up even more, if that was possible. He was ready to make his mark on this training program, starting right now. He had no idea that his world was about to be turned completely upside down. Instructor Walsh began walking down the line of trainees, her boots making barely a sound on the sandy ground. Marcus watched her approach, preparing the confident smile he usually reserved for meeting new commanding officers. He was ready to introduce himself properly and establish his credentials early in the program. "Today, we begin with a simple assessment," Walsh announced to the group. "I need to understand what kind of material I'm working with. Some of you may think you know what you're capable of. Others might believe your previous experience has prepared you for what comes next." She stopped directly in front of Marcus, those intense brown eyes locking onto his. Up close, he could see small scars on her hands and a thin line across her jawbone that spoke of real combat experience. This wasn't some desk instructor who had never seen action. "Lieutenant Thompson," she said, reading his name tag. "Army Rangers, I see. Impressive record, according to your file." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Finally, someone who recognized quality when they saw it. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm looking forward to adding SEAL qualification to my experience." Something shifted in Walsh's expression, so subtle that Marcus almost missed it. Her lips curved slightly, but it wasn't quite a smile. More like the expression a cat might wear when discovering a particularly interesting mouse. "Wonderful," she said softly. "Why don't you help me demonstrate the first exercise for your fellow trainees?" Marcus stepped forward eagerly. This was perfect. He would show everyone exactly what kind of soldier they were dealing with, and set the tone for the entire program. Absolutely, ma'am. What do you need me to do? Walsh gestured toward a section of the training ground that Marcus hadn't noticed before. It looked like a simple obstacle course, maybe 50 yards long, with low walls, rope climbs, and crawling sections. Nothing he hadn't conquered dozens of times before. This is our basic combat movement course, Walsh explained to the group. The goal is to move from point A to point B as quickly as possible, while maintaining situational awareness and tactical positioning. Lieutenant Thompson, please show us how an Army Ranger handles this type of challenge. Marcus nodded confidently and moved to the starting position. He could feel the eyes of every trainee on him, along with the other instructors who had gathered to watch. This was his moment to shine. He took a deep breath and settled into a runner's stance. Go, Walsh said simply. Marcus exploded from the starting line, his body moving with the fluid precision of years of training. He vaulted the first low wall without breaking stride, landed in a combat roll, and sprinted toward the rope climb. His form was textbook perfect, and he could hear murmurs of appreciation from some of the watching trainees. He scaled the rope quickly, using proper technique to preserve his energy for the obstacles ahead. At the top, he paused briefly to survey the course layout, then rappelled down with practiced ease. The crawling section came next, and Marcus dropped low, moving through the mud and sand with speed and efficiency. So far, everything was going exactly as planned. Marcus felt the familiar rush of physical exertion and the satisfaction of performing at his peak. This was what he lived for, the chance to push his body and mind to their limits while others watched in admiration. He cleared the final obstacle and sprinted toward the finish line, where Walsh waited with a stopwatch. Marcus crossed the line and came to a crisp halt, barely breathing hard, despite the intense physical effort. He had crushed this course, and he knew it. Time? He asked, confident that his performance had been impressive. Walsh glanced at her stopwatch. 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Marcus grinned. That had to be a solid time for a first attempt on an unfamiliar course. He looked around at the other trainees, expecting to see impressed faces, but instead found expressions that ranged from concerned to outright sympathetic. How did I do, ma'am? Marcus asked, still riding high on adrenaline. Walsh's face remained completely neutral. Interesting technique, Lieutenant. Very by the book. Very predictable. The word hung in the air like a physical blow. Tell me, Lieutenant, Walsh said, her voice still calm and professional. What did you observe while moving through the course? Marcus blinked. Ma'am? Situational awareness, Lieutenant. What threats did you identify? What tactical considerations did you note? What alternative routes did you evaluate? The questions came like rapid-fire gunshots, and Marcus realized with growing horror that he had no good answers. He had been so focused on speed and form that he hadn't been thinking tactically at all. He had treated it like a fitness test rather than a combat exercise. I focused on maintaining good time while using proper obstacle techniques, he said weakly. Walsh nodded slowly. I see. So you missed the 3 simulated sniper positions that had clear sight lines on your route. You failed to notice the 2 IED markers placed along your path. You ignored multiple pieces of cover that could have concealed your movement, and you never once checked your 6 for potential pursuit. Each word hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood there, feeling smaller and smaller as Walsh continued her assessment. Most importantly, she said, you missed the fact that this entire course was designed to test tactical thinking under pressure, not physical fitness. The obstacles were secondary to the real challenge. Marcus felt his world beginning to tilt. This wasn't possible. He was a decorated officer with multiple combat deployments. He knew how to think tactically. He had led men in firefights where tactical awareness meant the difference between life and death. Perhaps, Walsh continued, you'd like to try again? This time with proper tactical considerations? The offer felt like salt in an open wound, but Marcus nodded stiffly. Yes, ma'am. He moved back to the starting position, but now everything felt different. The confidence that had carried him through the first attempt was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. How had he missed such basic tactical elements? How had he turned a combat exercise into a simple fitness challenge? Go, Walsh said again. This time Marcus moved more carefully, trying to identify the threats Walsh had mentioned. But the more he thought about it, the more paralyzed he became. Every shadow could be a sniper position. Every piece of equipment could hide an IED. He found himself stopping and starting, second-guessing every movement. His time on the second attempt was over 7 minutes, and he knew his performance had been even worse than before. He had overthought everything, moving like a nervous rookie rather than an experienced combat veteran. Walsh watched him finish with that same neutral expression. Better situational awareness that time, Lieutenant. Unfortunately, you moved like you expected the enemy to wait politely for you to make your decisions. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. Around him, other trainees were trying not to stare, but he could feel their eyes on him anyway. This was turning into a complete disaster, and he had no idea how to stop it. Ma'am, with respect, he said, struggling to keep his voice level. I think there might be some confusion about the parameters of this exercise. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Confusion, Lieutenant? Yes, ma'am. In my experience, obstacle courses are typically designed to test physical conditioning and basic movement skills. If you wanted to test tactical decision-making, it might have been helpful to provide more specific guidance about the scenario we were supposed to be operating under. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus realized immediately that he had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to take the words back. He had just criticized his instructor's teaching methods in front of the entire group, and the expressions on the faces around him told him exactly how bad that looked. Walsh studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt like a bug under a microscope. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that he had to strain to hear her. I see. So, in your professional opinion, Lieutenant Thompson, the problem here is not your performance, but my instruction methods. Marcus wanted to take it back, to apologize, to somehow undo the last 30 seconds. But pride and embarrassment were driving him forward like a runaway train. I'm just saying that clear communication of objectives is fundamental to effective training, ma'am. Walsh nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, Lieutenant. Clear communication is essential. So, let me be perfectly clear about something. She stepped closer, and Marcus found himself looking directly into those intense brown eyes. What he saw there made his blood run cold. This is not a training exercise, Lieutenant Thompson. This is real life. And in real life, the enemy doesn't provide you with clear objectives or detailed briefings about what threats you might encounter. In real life, you have to figure it out as you go, adapt on the fly, and make life or death decisions with incomplete information. Her voice remained calm and professional, but there was steel underneath it now. In real life, Lieutenant, if you can't think tactically while moving under pressure, people die. If you can't adapt when your assumptions prove wrong, people die. And if you waste time arguing with your commanding officer about training methods while bullets are flying, people definitely die. Marcus felt like he was shrinking inside his uniform. Everything Walsh was saying was true, and he knew it. But somehow, in the space of 10 minutes, he had managed to forget everything he had learned about tactical thinking and leadership under pressure. Now, Walsh continued, would you like to try this exercise one more time? Or would you prefer to continue our discussion about training methodology? Marcus looked around at the faces watching him. Some showed sympathy, others embarrassment on his behalf, and a few looked like they were trying not to laugh. He had never felt smaller in his entire military career. I'd like to try again, ma'am, he said quietly. Walsh nodded. Good. But this time, Lieutenant, I want you to remember something. You're not just representing yourself out there. Every decision you make reflects on your ability to lead other soldiers in combat. If you can't handle pressure in a training environment, how can I trust you with the lives of real warriors in real combat situations? The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In his eagerness to impress, he had forgotten the most basic principle of military leadership. It wasn't about him. It was about the people he was responsible for, leading and protecting. As he walked back to the starting position for his third attempt, Marcus felt like everything he thought he knew about himself was crumbling. He had come here expecting to breeze through some advanced training and add another impressive qualification to his record. Instead, he was being systematically dismantled by an instructor who seemed to see right through all his pretensions and straight to his fundamental weaknesses as a leader. Marcus stood at the starting line for the third time. But everything had changed. The confident officer who had stepped onto the training ground an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who felt completely lost. His hands were shaking slightly, and he couldn't seem to control his breathing. This was supposed to be simple. This was supposed to be easy. "Take your time, Lieutenant," Walsh said from behind him. "Think about what you're really trying to accomplish here." Marcus nodded, but his mind was spinning. What was he trying to accomplish? A few minutes ago, he would have said he was trying to complete an obstacle course quickly and efficiently. Now he understood that the course itself was almost irrelevant. But if that was true, what was the real test? He forced himself to stop and actually look at the training ground. Not just the obstacles, but everything. The lighting, the positions of the instructors, the layout of equipment, the sight lines from surrounding buildings. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Marcus tried to see the environment as a combat veteran rather than an eager trainee. The differences were immediately obvious. The course wasn't designed for speed or efficiency. It was designed to force movement through areas where a real enemy could establish effective ambush positions. The obstacles were placed to channel movement into kill zones, and the natural cover was positioned just far enough away to make reaching it a calculated risk. Marcus felt a chill as he realized what Walsh had been trying to teach him. This wasn't about physical conditioning or even tactical movement. This was about learning to think like someone who might actually have to lead troops through hostile territory where every decision could mean the difference between bringing everyone home or writing letters to families about why their loved ones weren't coming back. "Contact left," someone shouted suddenly. Marcus spun toward the sound, his training taking over automatically. 3 instructors had appeared from concealed positions around the course, carrying training weapons and wearing the kind of gear that marked them as opposing forces. This was no longer a simple obstacle course. This had become a combat scenario. "Move to cover," Walsh called out. "Treat this as a real engagement." Marcus dropped low and assessed his options. The nearest cover was a concrete barrier about 20 yards to his right. But reaching it would mean crossing open ground under direct observation from at least 2 of the opposing force positions. To his left, there was a drainage ditch that offered concealment, but would take him away from his original objective. For a moment, he froze. In training exercises back with his ranger unit, the scenarios had always been clearly defined. Good guys here, bad guys there. Objective, clearly marked. This was different. This was chaos, and he was expected to make sense of it while people were shooting at him. Then something clicked in his mind. Walsh's voice echoed in his memory. "In real life, you have to figure it out as you go." She wasn't testing his ability to follow a predetermined plan. She was testing his ability to lead when there was no plan. Marcus made his decision. Instead of trying to reach the original finish line, he moved toward the drainage ditch, using it for concealment, while he worked his way around the flank of the opposing forces. It wasn't the direct route, and it wasn't the fast route, but it was the route that would keep him alive in a real firefight. As he moved, he found himself thinking not just about his own survival, but about how he would coordinate with other team members in a real situation. Where would he position a squad? How would he establish fields of fire? How would he call for support if needed? The exercise lasted another 10 minutes, with Marcus adapting to changing conditions as the opposing forces moved and new threats appeared. When Walsh finally called, "Cease fire," Marcus found himself in a completely different position than where he had started, having navigated a complex tactical situation that bore no resemblance to the simple obstacle course he had attempted earlier. Walsh walked over to where Marcus was crouched behind a piece of equipment he had been using for cover. "How do you feel about that performance, Lieutenant?" Marcus took a moment to catch his breath before answering. "Better, ma'am. I actually felt like I was thinking tactically, instead of just trying to complete a course. And what changed? It was a simple question. But Marcus knew the answer was anything but simple. I stopped thinking about myself and started thinking about the mission. I stopped trying to impress you and started trying to survive." Walsh nodded. "That's a start. But there's something else you need to understand, Lieutenant Thompson." She gestured for him to follow her to a quiet area away from the other trainees. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Was he about to be dismissed from the program? Had his earlier outburst been the final straw? "Do you know why you're really here?" Walsh asked. Marcus frowned. "To receive cross-training in SEAL operations and tactics." "No," Walsh said firmly. "That's what your paperwork says. But that's not why you're here. You're here because someone in your chain of command thinks you have potential, but they also think you have some serious blind spots that could get people killed." The words hit Marcus like cold water. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Thompson, you have an impressive record. Your tactical knowledge is solid, your physical conditioning is excellent, and your men respect you. But you have one critical weakness that your superiors hope this training might address." Walsh paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You think being a good leader means having all the answers. You think your job is to be the smartest person in the room, the strongest person in the unit, and the most experienced person on the team. And that kind of thinking will get people killed." Marcus felt like he was back at the starting line of that obstacle course, completely lost and unsure of what was expected of him. "I don't understand, ma'am." Walsh pulled out a folder that Marcus hadn't noticed her carrying. "Your last fitness report mentions excellent tactical knowledge, but tendency to rely too heavily on individual capabilities rather than team coordination. Your previous commanding officer noted that you demonstrate strong personal courage, but sometimes fails to adequately delegate responsibilities to subordinates." She flipped through several pages. 3 separate peer evaluations mention concerns about your willingness to ask for help or admit when you don't know something. And your last team exercise evaluation specifically states that you completed the mission successfully but failed to utilize available resources effectively. Each comment felt like another weight being added to Marcus's shoulders. He had always been proud of his self-reliance and individual competence. Now he was learning that those same qualities might be seen as weaknesses. "The thing is, Lieutenant," Walsh continued, "in SEAL operations, there's no room for heroes. There's only room for team members. Every person on a SEAL team is incredibly skilled and experienced. But what makes them effective isn't their individual capabilities. It's their ability to function as a seamless unit where each person's strengths complement the other's abilities." She closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. "Your job as an officer isn't to be the best at everything. Your job is to make everyone around you better at what they do." Marcus felt something fundamental shifting in his understanding of leadership. Everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about being a military officer, suddenly seemed incomplete. "So when you came out here today and tried to impress me with your individual performance, you were actually demonstrating exactly the kind of thinking that your superiors are concerned about." Walsh gestured back toward the training ground, where other trainees were now working through their own versions of the exercise. "Every one of those people has skills and experience that you could learn from. Every one of them sees things differently than you do, which means they might spot threats or opportunities that you would miss. But instead of trying to understand what they bring to the table, you were focused on showing them what you bring." Marcus thought about his behavior in the mess hall the night before, dominating conversations with his war stories and making sure everyone knew about his accomplishments. He had been so focused on establishing his credentials that he hadn't bothered to learn anything about the people around him. The real test today wasn't whether you could complete an obstacle course, Walsh continued. It was whether you could recognize when your initial assumptions were wrong and adapt accordingly. It was whether you could accept instruction from someone who might challenge your preconceptions. And it was whether you could handle being wrong without letting your ego get in the way of learning. Marcus realized with growing clarity that he had failed all 3 tests spectacularly. He had stuck with his initial assumptions until they were proven disastrously wrong. He had challenged his instructor's methods instead of questioning his own understanding. And, when his ego was bruised, he had lashed out instead of learning. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I think I've been approaching this all wrong." Walsh's expression softened slightly. "That's the first smart thing you've said all morning, Lieutenant." She handed him the folder she had been carrying. "This contains detailed evaluations from every exercise you'll complete over the next 6 weeks. Unlike your previous training, these evaluations won't focus on your individual performance. They'll focus on your ability to integrate with a team, learn from others, and lead through collaboration rather than domination." Marcus opened the folder and saw page after page of evaluation criteria that he had never considered before. Team communication skills, ability to incorporate input from subordinates, willingness to admit knowledge gaps, effectiveness in developing others' capabilities. "If you can demonstrate improvement in these areas," Walsh continued, "you'll graduate from this program with more than just SEAL qualification. You'll graduate with the kind of leadership skills that will serve you well, no matter what challenges you face in your career." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh. And, Lieutenant? That obstacle course you struggled with this morning? I designed it based on a real combat situation I encountered during my 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. The tactical considerations you missed aren't theoretical. They're the kinds of decisions that kept my team alive when we were operating behind enemy lines for 6 weeks, with no support." Marcus felt his jaw drop. "You're former SEAL Team 6, Lieutenant. 4 deployments, 3 Purple Hearts, and currently assigned as a senior instructor because someone decided that teaching the next generation of military leaders was more important than my personal comfort with being shot at." She walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone with the folder in his hands and a completely new understanding of everything that had happened that morning. The woman he had dismissed as just another instructor was actually one of the most experienced combat veterans he had ever met. The exercises he had treated as simple training scenarios were based on real-world situations where people's lives had depended on exactly the kind of tactical thinking he had failed to demonstrate. Most importantly, the leadership principles she was trying to teach him weren't theoretical concepts from a training manual. They were lessons learned through years of leading teams in situations where mistakes meant people didn't come home. Marcus looked back at the training ground where other officers were working through their own versions of the same challenges he had faced. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he found himself wondering not what he could teach them, but what he might learn from them. The confident lieutenant who had stepped off the transport vehicle that morning was gone. In his place stood someone who was finally ready to actually learn something.